So when I took on the challenge of chairing the conference, I called up Alan Marks, and I said, okay, Alan, how do we make this really compelling and different? And so if you've thought the intellectual content of this, many of you have come up to me and said, wow, it's been great, I've learned so much. One person who's been behind the scenes who's not been acknowledged for his contribution has been Alan Marks. So not only is he doing this panel that he pulled together for us, which I think you'll find fascinating, but I also want to thank Alan for his intellectual contribution and for prodding us to do something really different. So Alan and panel, please come forward. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for that kind introduction, Marjorie. It's always a pleasure. So we do hope to end the conference with a thought-provoking and engaging and interactive conversation about a lot of the themes we've talked about technology. We believe, as you hear, that a revolution is underway and that the technology that we're talking about, machine learning, AI, chatbots, blockchain, is going to transform, is transforming, and will continue to transform at an accelerated pace, not only consumer experiences and customer engagement, but transform the way companies operate, and therefore ultimately change the way we think about communications and engagement. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We are going to try to be interactive, so we're going to change the format a little bit. We're going to deal with these subjects in 3 sections, and so at the end of each section, we're going to open up for comments and questions. All right? So, want to kick off with, as with anything in technology, there's always a lot of hype that never materializes, and there's reality. So that's how we want to kick off. And I'll start with Dave. What do you see as hype, and what's reality?
So I'll be contentious and then back up a bit. I think one of the biggest hype areas I hear about at the moment is actually blockchain. And I don't believe it's the functionality of blockchain. I know what it does, I know how it works. What I can't understand is how someone's developed a technology where you feel compelled to use it, even though you haven't got a use case. So what happens now is I'll do conferences like this or user groups, and people come up and they'll say, Dave, what's your stance on blockchain? And I'll say, well, what's your use case? And they'll go, well, we haven't got one, but what's your stance? And I don't understand how we got to a point where everyone feels they have to look for a use case. I even saw a tech plan for a university last week, and it was focusing on what they were going to do this year. And one of the points at the bottom said, continue to investigate use for blockchain. I don't know how a technology has got such a grip where people will just try and find a way to get it in a company. So I think it works. I see the value of it. I think as we move towards kind of more of a gig society where perhaps people are bidding for work, I can see how it comes into our industry a little bit at that point. But right now, I think people spend more time trying to find use cases for blockchain than they do getting value from blockchain.
Great.
There's actually a website called doyouneedblockchain.com. Let me save you 5 seconds. Blank page, it says at the bottom, most probably no. So for a lot of people, you need blockchain. Amy here from EY knows a lot about blockchain because EY is investing for good reasons and they have a business case. For some of us, learning about blockchain is a complete waste of time because fear of missing out, FOMO, is not a business case. But I will talk about a technology that I think is not hype, is actually worth everyone's time. But before that, I'm going to ask the same question that I asked my husband when he starts raving about the New England Patriots, which is, why do I care? And why do we, this is not the Recode conference. Why do we care about these technologies? Because the people in this room are the keepers of corporate culture, of corporate reputation, of the CEO's outward orientation. And in a time of change and transformation, we have to make sure that we keep up, our story keeps up, that the culture is able to keep up, and when something inevitably goes wrong, that we're able to understand it. We have to know how the technology works in order to explain why it did what it did. So from John Iwata's excellent presentation yesterday, CEOs are looking for someone who can take that culture through this transformation, at the same time managing the risks and exposure that come with that change. All of those things are keywords for what people in this room do. I don't think that we necessarily need new expansion of the C-suite. that falls on us, and we can do that, but we need to understand the technologies. One word on internal comms. We're going to talk a lot about how technologies help us communicate with external audiences. Let's take a lesson from Under Armour and protect this house. There's tens of thousands of employees around the world for some of these companies that don't know how they're going to fit into this new business model or new technology, new way of operating. Or are they going to be displaced? Are they going to have to be retrained? But even better, how can they contribute to the mission and drive it forward? There's a great story about JFK, who in 1961 said, we're going to go to the moon the next decade. So he then later visits NASA to see how they're doing. And on his way out, he encounters a janitor and asks him, what's your role here? And the man says, Mr. President, I'm helping to put a man on the moon. So think about how every employee that your company has is helping to put a man on the moon. The technology that I think affects all of us is self-driving cars. That's the one that I want to highlight, autonomous vehicles. It's going to affect every industry, and we're not there yet. There's a lot of tough questions to answer. The classic one is if an AV is rear-ended at a crosswalk and it has to choose between veering off and killing its one passenger or going straight and killing 3 people in a crosswalk, what should it do? So who thinks it should kill the one passenger instead of the 3 people? Now, who would buy that car and sit in it?
Well, this is a marketing dilemma, though. Do you buy a car that will kill you before it kills anyone else? Exactly. Or are you the guy who's going to say, I'll buy a car that kills other people before it kills me?
Exactly. Do you want to be that guy?
That's a new persona, new marketing persona.
But we haven't answered this, and this study was actually done, and nobody wanted to buy that car, even though they thought that's how society should operate. So should there still be driver's licenses? Should drunk people be able to drive now? Can children drive? Can blind people drive? We haven't answered these questions, but the hype here is the technology itself. That's only part of the picture. If you talk to people who are working on AVs, and we work with the world's largest ride-hailing firm, so we watch this march towards autonomy happen. But if you watch people working on AVs, they're worried about the ethics, the business models, the regulations. There's a law on the books in some places in the US today called the red flag laws. If a woman is driving a car, a man has to walk in front of the car waving a red flag to make sure that people know to get out of the way. Our laws are not ready for self-driving cars. And so when this does happen, there's going to be mass disruption, and it'll affect every industry. Think about the legal profession. 35% of civil cases are from car crashes. Or the insurance profession, 94% of car crashes are due to human error. If you're in media, or if you have anything to do with e-commerce or entertainment, people, Americans only, spend 84 billion hours a year driving. Now they'll spend that time online instead, new revenue models. 20 people a day die waiting for an organ that they didn't receive on time. 20 people a day die waiting for an organ. 1 out of 7 of those organs comes from someone who died in a car crash. 37,000 people a year in the US die from a car crash. Are we going to have an organ shortage that we need to get ready for? So every industry in this room, I think every company represented here, is going to have to learn to figure out how they fit into this new ecosystem. And we're going to be in charge of telling that story and being ready when it comes. The good news is that experts think we have between 2 and 15 years to get ready. So that's our homework assignment.
Great examples. Just like we talked about culture change, the ethics, public policy, I mean, these are complicated issues, as you all know, that are not just about the technology itself. RJ, hype, reality.
So I think I want to click back one notch. I agree with the panelists here wholeheartedly. But when to really answer that question, you have to break down the emerging technology into 2 dimensions. There's a time vector, and then there's a relative impact vector. And with all of these things, we sort of, move the hype meter based on how far along we are in the trajectory of the evolution of these technologies. So fully agree at the current state of where we are with blockchain looking for a use case. It's because we're trying to get ahead of the curve of its vector of time that it requires to evolve and mature into something that actually could be impactful. And then we start to make judgment calls on whether blockchain is going to be a valid technology or not, maybe prematurely, because it's such early days. And clearly, the first instance of its application being cryptocurrency, and it is very powerful for that particular use case. And it's chaos right now. But it is in every industry that either emerges from nothing or is driving a massive transformation. You go all the way back to the auto industry, and you can look here in the United States at Henry Ford and his inventions. The little known fact is there were over 3,000 car companies in existence before it consolidated down to the big three. And it was chaos then too, and the same kind of questions come. And so I always look at it from the standpoint of, is this important? Am I clear about the use cases? No, but are the fundamental components of this technology and its purpose interesting? Does it have longevity and scale and the potential for impact? Yes. So I think from that perspective, it is important to try to understand it, but be careful not to get caught up into such an early adoption curve. The other part of it is people will assess very quickly, looking at the impact that it has by the end of 2018, and then continue to render those judgments. Like everybody wants to decide whether, tech trend or tech fad A, B, or C is real, is it dead, is it, et cetera. And most of them actually become important parts of the technology industry and ecosystem over time. They just sort of fade into their position, and they're just not as sensationalized, as they might have been at the onset. I think it's important to really think of it systemically. When I think about what's real, I'll go even one click back on autonomous vehicles to just autonomy. I think autonomy is being driven by the ability today to power things with machine learning, artificial intelligence that will absolutely transform not just industries, but I believe it's going to transform the human race, and it's going to transform society in so many fundamental ways. But why is that something to say now based on everything I just said? Is that hype or is that fiction? Well, AI's been around for 40 plus years. It's a science, it's not a thing. And what's happened is there have been some tectonic shifts in the building blocks of technology that have enabled this science to really solve some big problems that we never thought were possible before. Cloud computing, giving us basically supercomputer access like an ATM machine, is huge. Big data, remember that hype or reality kind of thing from a few years ago? The cost of storage for the data that is necessary, you need massive amounts of data and massive amounts of computing capacity to do something of a very simple human task. And you could imagine the amount of data and the computing you need to have an engine or an AI drive a car, down a public street. That's just one example. But you can look at autonomy solving problems everywhere, from manufacturing to healthcare. I mean, there's AI now combining machine learning, deep learning, and pattern recognition and computer vision that's detecting cancers before they become cancers at a level that no human being has the capacity to do. It's just not actually in our sensory capacity. It's phenomenal. And so for me, I look at the big opportunities more in these larger sort of tidal wave shifts, and we'll talk about it as we get into it. But that tipping point has only happened in, I'd say, the last 12 to 18 months, where those raw materials have really become accessible to everyone. And I mean, you have students in universities and research that are tackling massive problems that have faced the world since civilization existed, and they're solving them in record-breaking time. So I think over the next 10 years, you're going to see just a radically different world.
Well, great. Thanks for the opening comments. Very thoughtful. So let's stop for a moment. So these themes of how do you know when to pay attention to technology? How do you know when to get into it? How do you understand it? How do you identify a use case? If you don't have an obvious use case today, how do we understand the technology enough to envision future use cases that could be beneficial to our business? And importantly, based on, in particular, the work we do, how do you start thinking about the broader societal issues of technology that is going to happen in some form at some scale in the future? And we need to start thinking now about how we reconceptualize public policy and regulations and things of that nature. So let's stop for a moment before we move on and just see, does anybody have any comments or questions in terms of what's happening in your own organization relative to these issues? Okay, we covered all the issues. Everybody's hungry for lunch. I don't know which one. Okay, well, we'll move on with the conversation. If I don't see, no, it is hard to see everybody in the room. But
Everyone's busy.
does anybody have a use case for blockchain in the room? Well, let's move on. So based on the initial thoughts and conversations, of all the technologies that we're talking about and reading about and hearing about, what's your pick for the one technology that you think really is going to achieve scale in the next, say, 3 to 5 years and start to have transformative effects? Why don't we start with you, Lulu?
Voice search, voice technology. Voice is going to be transformational because it's going to allow a new audience to access information in a new way. Voice search can be used by children as young as 2, people who are quite old, people who can't see, who can't read. Even we're working on language barriers going away. Already about half of the US adult population uses voice search, and I looked up the 5 top ways that they're using it when they're looking for information, and it's to find information about companies and their brands and reputations, to find information about products and researching what to buy and making purchases. How are we not all over this? And I think some of the people are in this room. I'd love to hear what people are doing about it. But the fundamental dynamic that's going to change with voice search is there's going to be a winner-take-all dynamic like never before. So right now when you search, you go to Google on your mobile or laptop, you type in something, it gives you a menu of 30 options, and you might click on the first one, or you might click on the 5th one because you see that that's most relevant to you. When you ask your, say, Alexa to recommend some paper towels, it'll just tell you and you'll say, yes, do it. It's not going to list 30 types of paper towels for you, and you won't say, tell me more, is there a 3-ply? You'll just say, yes, do it. So the winner-take-all dynamic is going to be huge. We work with a firm that does a lot of the voice skills for Alexa, and they told me that 82% of companies that get to the top result, which is where you've just got to be, stay at the top, which means 82% of the companies that don't get to the top won't get to the top. So there's 3 things. I have 3 specific things that people can do to get towards the top or at the top. The first one is change the keywords that you're associated with. We all know that the keywords on Google that we want to own, that we've bought. But there's a great quote by Steve Martin that goes, some people just have a way with words, other people not have way. The traditional way of searching is not have way. We all sound like cavemen if you were to read aloud your Google queries, which I die inside at the thought. But the type of query is restaurant, Soho, BBQ, and you have to stop what you're doing and do this. The natural language way to ask is, where can we get some ribs around here? And if a restaurant hasn't associated itself with the natural language way to ask, it will become invisible in voice search results. That's number 1. Number 2, it better be fast and it better be good. I don't know how often people visit their own websites. Wait for it to load. If it takes more than 2 seconds, Google is pushing you down in search results to penalize you. With voice, people have less patience than ever before. Every new technology, people have less patience. And I'm not judging. I'm someone who hits refresh on the Domino's pizza tracker. Like, I'm not judging. That's just how people are. But it's got to be good the first time. And then third is just simply do it now. When voice search results want to recommend something quickly, they're going to go to what's already popular. They're going to recommend you buy what you've already bought. So the best way to win in that future world is to win starting immediately if you're not already all over it. Bizarrely, our CEO made us go work out with MMA fighters. I'm not kidding. The most dangerous team building activity ever. And they told us they live by the mantra, don't get ready, stay ready. Don't get ready, just be ready. And that's what we have to do as this new environment, this new ecosystem of information is changing.
It reminds me, a few weeks ago, I was in London talking to a designer who spent 20 years designing pixels, UX experience design, and he was saying now he's looking for conversational designers. UX design skills is not something he needs anymore. He needs to design for voice. You're no longer designing for the screen. So a good example of the kind of changes that are underway right now.
100%. We have conversational interface designers at eBay and have had for over 2 years now. It's going to be more. It's absolutely voice search, but it's going to be much more than that. Conversational interfaces are opening up an entirely new way to consume information. So certainly conversational commerce at eBay, we think about this a lot. We've actually launched a personal shopping assistant in partnership with Facebook. We brought 1 billion items from eBay's catalog of stuff that we have for sale at any moment on eBay to 1 billion users on Facebook Messenger. And why did we do that? And we did that about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. We quietly launched this, and we put what we call ShopBot out into the wild. And it was a fantastic learning experience for us because that's where conversations are going on naturally. So you want to show up where people are already in conversation, move away from search and into natural language dialogue, which if you're building an AI that's built on natural language understanding, it's learning from every conversation and interaction it has. So it gets smarter, it becomes more personalized, it gets to know you, and the recommendations are starkly different than what you might ever find in a mobile app or on a shopping website today. It's really fascinating. And it goes beyond just ask a question, get an answer, because if you think of a shopping experience that you go through in the real world, whether you're walking into a department store, a hardware store, you name it, and you got a home improvement project you're trying to fix. And usually the experts in the store, you won't talk in search terms, right? It won't be, plastic shovel. You usually talk about the job you're doing, what you're trying to do, and the person in the store has usually a lot of experience and may recommend a few other things to really make that job a success for you that you weren't even thinking to ask. That's the power of conversation, first and foremost, is getting to a level of relevance and context that's just, again, beyond what we've been able to do with keyword searches, which is really sort of a hunt and peck and a guess that you hope then you get the best answer back in sort of a binary, 1-2 punch. But in conversation, you have much greater chance. Now, this is a lot harder because building a human that, or building an AI that has human-like capabilities to hold such a conversation has never been possible before. But it is now. We now have the computing capability and the understanding of languages, and in fact, language that goes across international boundaries of languages to really understand communication. So these principles apply in any language that you're thinking about. I go one step further just to talk about why this is so important. If you look at what Google and Amazon and many others are now getting in this game, are going after, it's getting into your everyday lives, getting you away from the computer, the mobile phone screen. This is now about ambient consumption. So you have an Alexa on your kitchen counter, maybe you have a Google Home device on your nightstand. They're going to be wired into every smart home. Those just microphones and everything in every room that you're in. That's all happening. And everything that you want or need is available at the speed of thought. There's no picking up a device, opening it, swiping, unlocking. That's massive amount of friction today. We kind of think it's easy, and even now with Face ID and you can unlock your phone without doing anything, it's still a bunch of work. You just decide you want to buy something, you want tickets to a concert, you want to get driving directions somewhere or check traffic. The race is absolutely on for who has the first answer to everybody's just sort of everyday questions in life. It's already in your car as well. So the power here is an entirely new medium, which is one that's been here with the human race all along. That really strips away the traditional needs for computers and mobile devices. And it's going to reshape the way all of these tools and technologies and phones and computers are designed in the future, if they're even in existence in the future.
Yeah. I think when I get home, I'm going to ask Alexa for a use case for blockchain. See what she says.
There you go. There you go. Should be an interesting conversation.
Back to the employee experience. One of the things we're doing right now is we're taking our chatbot technology and we're using it to create a new employee experience. And we're taking the most queried HR cases for our employee base, the most search queries, the knowledge documents, and we're turning those into chatbot conversations. And so we're launching with 40 conversations, and then it's going to get smarter and smarter and smarter. And I'm sure some of you are doing the same thing. And it's a good example from an employee communications point of view and an HR point of view. It's a new skill set for us to sit down with HR and say, let's reconceptualize these activities that employees care about into conversations. And we anticipate over the next few years that we will gravitate toward primarily voice interaction for our employee experiences with our HR services.
I think the whole concept of a non-graphical UI, be it voice, be it touch, be it gesture, whatever route we go down, I think that's interesting when it becomes applied into a work situation as well. A lot of people discuss what happens kind of socially, how you interact at home, but when that goes to work, it becomes more interesting. But for me, what's going to be really revolutionary is the AI that sits behind a lot of these interfaces. And I was telling Alan before, if it wasn't for me having kids, I wouldn't have that much of a career, because most of my stories or most of my insights or most of my just looking at the way people operate comes from looking at my kids. So we were sitting, it was last Halloween. I've got 2 kids, 2 daughters, one's 12, one's 7. And a 12-year-old had decided she was going to go as a werewolf. So the 7-year-old decided she's going to go as Red Riding Hood, because she thought Red Riding and the werewolf would be a better story. So I'm sitting doing email, and she's sitting with an iPad next to me. And she said, how do you spell costume? And I said, just give me a minute, Charlie, I'm just finishing this. And obviously Charlie's like 7, she's like a millennial on cocaine, she's not going to waste a minute for anything. So then I hear her go, show me girls' werewolf costumes. And she just said it. And she didn't type it. And I thought, well, this is interesting. So now, it's not the fact you've got that voice interface, it's now the fact she can do something she doesn't know how to do. So what becomes interesting then is, as AI progresses and AI develops, you don't need to know how to do something, you just need to know what you want to do. Now, if that goes through into the world of enterprise software, for example, let's imagine I'm someone working on a security desk, and we notice there's an intrusion coming in from outside. Typically, what I would have done is I would have hired engineers who had vast amounts of security experience to be able to go in and get all the information that they needed for that. But imagine now I've got a voice interface, and I'm working on a ticket, and I just say, hey, Alexa, can you just get me the security logs for the current server? I don't need to know how to set up a terminal screen. I don't need to know how to FTP a file. I don't need to know how to go down and tail a log. I just know that I want that log file. So the ability to just go in and be able to say, hey, I want that, and give me it now, that's what's going to change, because then you don't have these big monolithic workflows. Then people can just break things down and do it in parallel. And the speed, to go back to what you were saying before, RJ, about what's changed in the last few years, I was doing a similar session to this with a guy called Toby Walsh. And Toby's the professor of artificial intelligence for New South Wales University in Australia. And I said, wow, how long have you been like professor of AI? And he said, 20 years. And I said, that must have been an easy gig. What did you do for the first 18 years? And he laughed and he said, we wrote the algorithms. But it's only now that you've got to the point where you've got ubiquitous access, unlimited compute, huge amounts of data. You can go out and you can use the algorithms that these people have created. And when you start to look at the level these algorithms can get to now, I was doing some research for a presentation at the end of last year where I was saying, what's new this year? What levels have been surpassed this year? Now, this doesn't exist on a mobile device yet, but this was the first year where artificial intelligence became better at reading lips than humans.
Yeah.
So you imagine a scenario now where you sit in a room like this, once that technology gets mobilized, you just need a security camera and you could have every conversation that happened in this room. No one needs to be mic'd. No one needs to be listened to. You imagine the impact something like that has on a city like London, for example, where everything's videoed all the time. there's a lot of things that AI will change.
Or China.
Or
Just
China.
to insert it, we work a lot with China, so sometimes going there feels like you're stepping into a Blade Runner movie or a
Right.
Minority Report or something. And there's the good and the bad. Obviously, we don't want to become like China, but there's specific instances where you see the potential of this technology. They've got these facial recognition glasses now. You just pop them on. It scans everyone in the room, scans their what they're saying, what they're doing. They've got the mobile payments market that's 90 times larger than what we have. So there's QR codes that you see hanging around the necks of panhandlers. Panhandlers have QR codes, the savvy ones. So you can scan them and send them an Alipay or a WeChat payment because nobody leaves the house with wallets anymore. There's QR codes on graves, so you can scan it and find out more information about the deceased. In Japan, too. So I don't want to detour the conversation towards that, but it is interesting to see internationally because there's a lot of global companies represented here. You go to Shanghai all the time, you cross the membrane, all the possibilities.
Yeah, this reminds me also of another company that I just got familiar with that is applying all of this AI technology to applicant screening in recruiting, where the AI will sit in front of a video conference with the person and ask a series of questions, and the person will answer these questions, on video, and it analyzes facial expressions, voice fluctuations, and actually also quality of the responses and where they go with the questions. And what they say is so interesting about it is that as it continues to look over a large swath of cross-section of candidates, it starts to form opinions about people and make recommendations, to your company based on the criteria in your culture. That to me is so interesting, and what they think is so powerful about it is it's also stripping away our subconscious biases, whether they're gender or race or anything. It might even be a bias just in the way that somebody dressed or in the way that they answered that question, that maybe you didn't like their tone or something, that goes into the small nuances of our decisions, right or wrong, that perhaps the AI is going to be able to address with greater consistency. Mm-hmm. Super interesting.
Mm-hmm. Let's open it up. Examples in your own companies? Over here.
Somebody comes to you. So we can have these one after another.
Back here, and then we'll come up.
Hi, my name is Rowan Beneke. I look after the tech practice for Burson. There is a techlash that's been happening over the last several months. The divide between good tech and bad tech, technology in service of people or people in service of technology, and the lines have been drawn. And now that the regulators are coming after Amazon and Facebook and many other companies, I wonder what your perspective is on how that's going to change and whether it's going to change the pace of innovation that we've seen over the last year or so.
Great question. Who wants to?
So I don't mind doing it. I think that's it's an interesting area. I think it's an interesting area specifically for this audience where you're focused on how you communicate something. I've met companies now they've almost had a fear about announcing their AI initiative because they worry the perception is, well, it's going to be reducing jobs, it's going to be removing people from the company. The prime use that I see people using this type of technology for at the moment, and I think this is why the pace of innovation will continue to develop, is to actually give people a better experience. So I was with Tulane University a week before last in New Orleans, just having a conversation with them, and they were looking to deal with the experience they got where someone would call their help center or their call center and they'd get put in a queue and they'd say, hey, you're number 3 in the queue and you'll be dealt with soon. And they put a different system in where it'd come up and it'd say, hey, you're number 3 in the queue, or do you want to speak to one of our automated assistants? And you could go, okay, I'll speak to the automated assistant. And what that did is that took them through to a voice chatbot. So they'd say what they wanted. They had, I think it was 180 or 190 different common use cases where people had asked for something and they get information. And rather than it being read over the phone, because the bot knew who you were coming in, it'd just say, I found an article that addresses what your issue is, and I've sent it to your inbox. And then people had kind of avoided getting in the queue. So the drive there was to give people a better experience. And I think a lot of the use for AI will actually be to augment skill sets to make people better initially. Then perhaps when we look like 5, 8 years down the line, you'll start to see different use cases where people analyze the data to make different decisions. But I think initially there's no need to slow down that race of innovation, because people are looking for use cases that make people better, not that necessarily replace people.
So to answer your question also directly, is people are not going to stop innovating. People aren't going to stop innovating. The problems still exist. There are problems left to solve, but things are going to continue to go wrong. There's a saying that a rifle fires from its muzzle and from its butt. Every new problem that we're able to solve has unintended consequences or creates other problems. We can't stop that. There's nothing the people in the room can do. We're not going to manipulate zeros and ones to create infallible technology. All we can do is understand what it's doing, be smart about all the possible directions this could go, and be ready to explain it. One important note on AI, just to clarify, there's 2 kinds of AI. There's 2 kinds of AI. The first kind is strong AI, which is Terminator. The second kind is weak AI, which is the only kind that we have right now. It is weak AI that all it can do is follow the set of rules that we give it to perform specific tasks. You can't outsource judgment, accountability, and making a human connection to the AI. That's our job. So the technology will continue to advance and move forward. People will continue to innovate. And we have to continue to do the human part of that job that falls on us. So I don't think it'll stop. I think we'll just see more of it.
I think that the situation we're in now with the companies and the examples you mentioned is not unique and not new. You can go back to the earlier days of Google, and it's actually still an issue today. The wrangling of Google's page rank and relevance engine, and what is coming up in the search results based on what you type, has for 2 decades been controversial. And there's been takedown battles in just about every region and country that still go on today, right? Whether it's about the information that comes up on an individual, or the information on a topic, or on a religion, and there's often these questions that come up when these companies get to such critical mass. What influence do they have over the evolution of society? And I think, to your point, it's not a deterrent whatsoever to innovation, but it is an output. It is a consequence of success and scale that I think frankly it is a little bit overridden and maybe drowned out by just the continued blistering pace of evolution and innovation that happens on top from these companies. And it seems, in this sort of day and age that we're in, the conversation's getting a little bit bigger and a little bit weightier, and I think it's actually a healthy one. I'm not ready to take a position on the current situation at hand because I think in a couple of the instances they didn't get it right, and you have company leaders coming out in public and saying we didn't get it right. There are a lot of holes in the system. We're patching them. We're fixing them, and that's a little bit different story, than just the system that's working so perfectly is now taking on a different shape. There were actually some things that could have avoided perhaps the level of that we've gotten to today. And so it is a stark reminder that as any of these companies and these technologies start to achieve such scale and wield such impact, that the responsibility you have for really battening down the hatches and not taking these things for granted, especially your customers' information and managing their privacy, it's paramount to your existence. And so, in many respects, a very, very important wake-up call for everybody. And I've seen every company who has different policies or hasn't been affected or maybe does a much better job in managing privacy all come out of the woodwork. And I'm seeing it in the experiences of their products, reminding people or refreshing their privacy policies or just, tightening the screws down and saying, hey, we better get the house in order here too. Where are we? Where's our blind spots, and where have we gotten a little bit too lax?
Yeah, well, it's a great it's a great timely question, obviously, and it's a good example of how we as communication professionals are need to be and are deeply involved and embedded in what's happening, and how do we help protect the reputations of our companies and help people understand, what's real and what's not.
Hi, I'm John with Gagan McDonald. I'm curious how you think it's going to sort out in the future especially with voice capturing information and artificial intelligence. So your daughter asking for a werewolf costume, that could be captured permanently in some places. And we have one set of Western standards and attitudes towards privacy happening, and in other parts of the world, they're going to have different rules and what have you. And so if you're a global consumer, maybe your daughter asking the question in the United States, it doesn't go into a data file somewhere, and they're not tracking her through the cameras in the neighborhood and monitoring her movements, but in another part of the world, they might be correlating that. How is that all going to settle out? I mean, if I'm a consumer and I act one way in the United States and I fly in another country, what set of assumptions am I going to have? Are we going to have a universal standard, or are we just going to have to learn the rules in every different region?
So I think the assumption that everyone should probably make now is that privacy is pretty much gone. That everything that people do is now recorded. I think different countries will start to come up with different ethical stances on this, as to what their retention policy is going to be, to what their sharing policy is going to be. I think some of the stuff coming out now with Facebook, for example, is driving people to start to reconsider, well, how is that data shared? Now, the same way you got Snapchat coming out saying, hey, we don't store images, so it's safe, you can do what you want, and not realizing that anyone can capture a screen at any time, kind of missing that point so that it then becomes permanent, was kind of an interesting move where people were starting to look towards privacy. I think some of it will be driven by the generational switch now. When you see this whole switch now between kind of the Gen Z to Alpha Gen, there was originally this concept that everything was going to become more and more public. But if I look at the way my kids use stuff now, it actually becomes more and more private. There's less willingness to share data. Things aren't done on generic group posts. Everything's brought down to a small level. So I don't know, and I haven't really got an answer on this, but I don't know whether companies who start to operate stricter privacy policies may well end up becoming more popular as an investment opportunity for people based on the fact they've got that privacy principle.
I mean, we also have a precedent, right? There's a voice command, and we're thinking a lot now about where does all of that data go. It has a direct corollary to search, right? So where do all of your searches go when you're typing a traditional search in Google or Bing or Amazon or any place? All of that's recorded as well. And companies like Google give you control over whether and how much of your search history is stored. You can delete it at any time, but the value of letting your searches be stored is you get a more personalized search experience as a result. So, kind of similar to what you were saying before, like if there is a significant perceptible value to the use of that data for you, great. And if that data, at least you have some clarity around what it's going to be used for and it's not exploited, I mean, that's the part I think that we have to understand. But for voice, it's very similar because it's really just translating what you're speaking into text and going into a search. So it becomes text, and we can manage it similarly. Where it gets different, though, is in the ambient case. So, in the case of an Alexa or Google Home, it's listening all the time. It's listening to everything you're saying. It only responds when it hears the trigger word, Alexa or Hey Google. And there's been a lot of discussion about that. What are these companies doing with the ambient conversations that are just rolling leading up to? Should they be doing anything with it? Similar, like, would it create even better value for the consumer? Amazon's doing voice printing, right? So now it will recognize who is talking and who's in the room and know them by name and be able to, again, build a bit of a relationship and a bit of a profile. And so if you have kids, eventually it'll know the kids and know the style of questions you're asking and make different sorts of recommendations. And in fact, it could actually be really cool if again done right. So there's a value in, letting that information go to these systems, but again, with, a lot of work to do to think about like what we're going to do to safeguard, just a 10x amount of information that's going to be gathered.
Just curious, a show of hands, has anyone recently changed your own practices due to privacy concerns or data concerns? A few hands in the room. Yeah, it's a real issue.
Yeah.
Let's go over here, next question.
Do people remember last year, I think it was last year, when there was a murder case?
Yeah.
Some guy had a friend over, wild night of partying in the hot tub. By morning, the friend was dead. The guy had an Amazon Echo in his home, and law enforcement wanted to see what was recorded on there. I wouldn't want to listen to that, but they wanted it, right? And so they asked Amazon for it, and Amazon said, that's not how it works. We don't store that stuff. The problem is, companies can come out and tell you what they're doing. First of all, no one has read the iTunes Terms of Service, right? More people have read the Bible front to back than the iTunes Terms of Service. But even if you did read it, you might not necessarily trust what they're telling you. There's a theory, and two friends have told me this in the past 2 days, that Facebook has the microphone always on, so that if I'm talking to you but I want to get lobster dinner, an hour later I'll be shown an ad for lobster dinner. Facebook has come out and said unequivocally, we do not do that. Problem is people don't trust them. So there's an erosion of trust where what companies say doesn't necessarily translate into what people believe.
We rolled out Facebook's Workplace product at our company, and separate instance, private instance, no interaction with public Facebook. If you're on Facebook, you can't connect at all. And we had a couple of employees who were convinced that Facebook was tracking their employee conversations and serving up ads based on their employee conversations. This perception issue is a real issue to get underneath. Yeah. There's a question over here.
Paul Abrahams from RedX Group. We're a $40 billion information analytics company based in London. I think kind of the hype cycle is actually still a very useful model, and we do a lot of machine learning and natural language processing, but we don't call it AI because we think AI is probably what's going to happen in 5 years' time, and then we'll just view it as commonplace. But looking back 3 or 4 years ago, everybody was talking about big data, and in terms of use examples, the opportunities there are huge. So the combination of very large volumes of data, which we have, combined with deep customer understanding, large technology platforms we can run on a global basis, and then actually building analytics and tools that can help people do their jobs better. That combination is incredibly powerful. And our problem now is actually prioritizing, because there are so many opportunities to exploit that technology that it's difficult to know where we should deploy our capital and labor to make that a reality. But we've definitely seen our business accelerating because of that. We're aware of blockchain and what's kind of out there, but that's not where we're deploying our capital at the moment, because actually stuff that people were hyping 3 or 4 years ago is now actually it's gone through the hype curve and it's now coming out the other side.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Okay.
Hi, Cheryl Battles from Pitney Bowes. First of all, thank you so much for the conversation, really thoughtful and very helpful. At Davos for the last couple of years, they've been talking about the fourth industrial revolution, so it's physical, digital, and biological. I'd be fascinated to hear any examples that you've seen of that, particularly in the workplace. The only one I had heard of was this small company in the Midwest that asked for volunteers to implant a chip in their wrist so that they could get rid of ID badges and get in access to the building.
And most of them did it, as I recall.
And most of them did it. That was what was so amazing to me. So any examples or thoughts about that, I would love to hear. Thank you.
So we've talked a lot about voice technology, and I'm going on about how everyone can use it and you can be disabled. Maybe you're thinking, what about people who can't speak? What about people who have had trauma, have had throat cancer, and don't have a voice? You can actually now donate a voice. After this session, I'm going to ask Dave to donate his voice to me because it's awesome. All you have to do is you kind of record it like Siri. So you could record a series of sounds and words. There's the proper legal protocols, and then you would donate that to me, and I would be able to, instead of sounding very machine-like when I make these sounds, be able to speak in your lovely voice. And that's one example of augmenting or making up human capability through melding technology with what we're born with. It's kind of a personal story, I suppose. It came from someone I knew. So one of my friend's daughter got type 1 diabetes, and she's only 11. And she was going through this whole thing of testing herself 8 or 9 times a day while her pancreas closed down, and then trying to inject herself to balance it off. And she got a device from a company in San Diego called the Dexcom device. And the Dexcom device kind of sits anywhere in your body. There's like a microfiber that goes in, and it's constantly monitoring your glucose level. And she was checking that on an app on the phone. And then the interesting thing was, you look at the next gen of Fitbit technology. What Fitbit were doing was saying, well, how could we link through to that Dexcom device? Because A, we don't want to be able to say you've got to have a phone for it to work. But then they can start to take that data and say, well, how does exercise or heart rate affect then how glycogen and glucose production happens? And then the next stage after that is, how do you link that to a dynamic pump so that you're constantly being able to balance those levels? And I think a lot of the work coming out now around wearables, specifically from what physical data it can get, is really interesting. The big drive at the moment around Fitbit technology is the next release looking at blood pressure, but the release after that looking at what can happen around sweat analysis. And all the investment being done in that is being done by insurance companies, because they're saying, if we're going to pay for someone to take a drug, we'd like a way to be able to check that they're taking that drug. If the person's saying they're not drinking heavily, if the person's saying they're not smoking, a way to be able to check that data and collect that data. So I think wearable technology tied to other technologies will become a lot more relevant as we move forward over the next few years.
Yeah, it's a big one, and Apple's doing the same. They've been making massive investments around the watch and the entire sort of health and wellness and fitness category, and looking at all of the non-invasive technologies and sensors, and working with researchers and universities around the world to, basically build a fully diagnostic, physician on your wrist, if you will. And as you were mentioning, you can imagine, and it's hard, but when we hit that sort of threshold and these non-invasive sensors actually work, it's going to open up, I think, an entirely new category that transcends the insurance companies, but transcends medical services, transcends fitness training, and even psychiatry and mental health as well.
There was a great example where someone was saying, if you had that technology and took that data, imagine getting the alert that says you should go to a hospital because there's a 90% probability you're going to have a heart attack in the next 3 hours. To be able to do that preventative medicine.
Beyond the pure biology, I just want to note the psychiatric aspect. We talk a lot about mental health. That's something mental health is intangible, tech is intangible. When you bring them together, there's actually a lot that you can do. So there's been studies done with using AI chatbots to interact with veterans who have PTS. And they're more willing to open up and speak frankly to an AI chatbot in a lot of cases than to another person. Or there are VR immersive experiences where if someone has an amputation and they feel this phantom limb that hurts a lot and you can't do anything about it because it's not actually there, right? You can put them in a VR environment where they're somewhere very cold and then dial that down over time. That actually takes away the phantom pain. So there's ways where we can get at things that are not physically biological.
Do we have another question over?
Hi, Stacy back here in the back.
Okay.
Stacy Shear from Weight Watchers. We're doing a lot for our member experience around natural language search to obviously make tracking easier. So you can just say, I had coffee and a bagel with cream cheese for breakfast, and then it would just take that and track it for you. But on the employee side, we launched Workplace by Facebook earlier this year to all of our 18,000 employees globally. And it's been pretty transformational for us from a culture and internal communications perspective. And now we're looking at, there are tons of bot integrations that you can use with that. And it's unfortunate that you have to look at things like this, but there's something called Safety Bot that in a crisis situation, whether it's a workplace shooting, like we just saw at YouTube, or like the hurricanes that we saw last year with the hurricanes, with a distributed workforce, we literally had territory managers calling and emailing and texting their employees in the affected areas, trying to figure out who was impacted, who lost their homes, who were displaced, and whether our physical locations were impacted. And with the bots, you can actually do an automated message through Workplace saying, "Are you okay?" And if they reply like saying no, then that goes into a system, it tracks it, and you can follow up with the people who said, "No, I'm not okay," or they can respond back and say what the problem was. So, that's, if anyone has done any implementations with that, let me know, because we haven't done it yet. But those are the things that we're thinking about in terms of, another one might be new hires, so that they could actually do a natural language question saying, how do I sign up for health benefits, or how do I, set up my technology, and that those conversations would actually be handled by a bot instead of tying up HR and benefits people with really basic questions, or asking them to go search on an intranet, which we've never had a good one. So
I mean, I don't think anyone in the industry's had a good intranet. I don't know why that
There's
is.
no such thing.
It's just, and it's usually like the first thing the new employee sees, and you're just like, oh God, it's terrible. And you really don't need it. If you think about it, there is nothing. We seem like it's a challenge. Like, okay, you're the new hire. See if you can find where your benefits are.
Amazing.
Maybe blockchain would solve that, right?
That's right. Find a use case for a blockchain, and we'll give you your benefits information. But surely a conversational interface could knock out 85% of those use cases, especially for people onboarding in an enterprise, in a fraction of the time. Like there's just some immediate pain points that are significant that you could be putting this against today. And I love all the examples around the enterprise. It's not just on the consumer front. I think in the workplace there's tremendous opportunity for the technology today.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments? Okay, well, we'll move into the final section, which really is about culture. And we've touched on it earlier, but this idea of the technology is real, it's going to happen. How do we need to think about the way it changes our behavior, changes culture, and therefore changes the way we communicate and engage? So love to just hear your thoughts on that and examples you see of you touched on it earlier, how are we thinking about dealing with the cultural impact and the behavioral impacts of some of these technologies? And you had talked about self-driving cars as one example.
Sure, I'm happy to start. And I think just building off the very last couple of examples that came from the audience, I think for first decoding the hype curve and locking in on those that are real allow us then to prepare for adoption. And whether it's adopting it as enterprise technology or adopting it as a consumer value proposition is critical. And I'll be open and transparent about this. I've been a product and technology guy my whole career, and my relationship with the communications teams in all the companies that I've worked at, including the many startups that I've founded, has always been dynamic and always been in some cases like a very hyperbolic relationship in some ways. And what do I mean by that? Sort of as a product and technologist, my job, I'm sort of paid to come in and invent and see around corners and disrupt and be first to market with things. And there's a lot of risk and challenges that come with that my partners in communications for the companies are there to try to help balance out that risk so that you don't drive the company bus off a cliff, so to speak, or take all your customers down with you with a technology that might be a little bit premature, but you want to get it out there because you want to be in market early and often. And there are plenty of big companies who do this, who break glass and go fast. And yes, there can be some downstream, implications to that, but there can also be downstream implications if you're always last to market. You may not ever be in market again. And so one, there's a dichotomy there that, like, if I were sending a message into an audience of communications executives that now more than ever in this industry, I think the partnership between product technology and communications is critical. It's critical for that practice to be in the tent and sort of deeply plugged into these technologies, the good, the bad, et cetera. And with the wave that is upon us now with the power of artificial intelligence, we're way on the other side of the hype side of this curve, like it is in, activation mode. And so we have to embrace it. We should have the courage to lean in. I don't think it's a career-limiting move at this point. I think it's a career-limiting move if we don't jump in with both feet to really seize this, be part of the conversation, be part of the narrative, but also part of bringing this technology to life in lots of really powerful ways, because it's right there at our disposal. And Alan, I mean, you gave some examples of how you're deploying it in your company right now as well, and it's just the tip of the iceberg. It's transformative. And so, and what I often find is when that's the case, and interestingly enough, with my communication partners at eBay, we have a huge role to play in shaping the culture of the company between these groups, because we're managing all the internal communications. We set the tone for who we are, where we're going, what we're doing, and why. And then I'm sort of the one creating the roadmap and the plan for that consumer value proposition, what we're going to do for our customers. And they're inextricably tied. And I just feel like we're at a profound inflection point in the industry, certainly when it comes to technology and something as provocative as AI that's creating a field of autonomy that's, putting things out there and challenging us with questions of, what is the car going to run over, this person, this dog, et cetera. Like, we need to be informed, but participating in those conversations and embracing the technology now.
Just one of the things I believe strongly is the employee experience and the idea of the consumerization of work. And that's what we see, particularly if you have a millennial workforce. Everything we enjoy in our personal lives, people want to have at work now. And so things like bringing a Facebook Workplace product into work is hugely transformative, because that's the way we live our lives. And to bring that into the workplace, when we did it at our company, one of the most poignant first examples I got, which we weren't really thinking about, we've got a lot of, B2B sales, so we have a lot of people working remotely. I immediately got a Facebook message from an employee working remotely, and she said, I've been in this company for 5 years, and for the first time I feel connected to the company, because she immediately had a social community of 6,000 people. And so this idea of how do we bring consumer experiences into the workplace and not reinvent the wheel. If there's a consumer product out there that is ready for an enterprise application, use what people are already using in their personal lives, and it is transformative to the employee experience.
And I think it ties just one added point to that. When we talk about, I think there were some conversations about millennials and Gen Zs, and when you think about the impact and just the takeover that's about to happen of these generations ruling the workplace, you've got to meet them where they are, right? And we're all using this technology, but they're using it even further than that. And why? Because it's hyper efficient. They have, we all have the same finite set of attention units when we wake up in the day, but they are, meticulous in the usage of their attention units with hyper efficiency. And if you don't have the tools in the organization, you're not going to create a work environment that they want to be a part of. And you want these smart folks in your organizations. That is for sure.
I think, for example, we may be seeing the decline of email, because we've deployed Facebook and Slack at the enterprise level, and it's only been 4 months, and it's only been a month for Slack, and we're already seeing a decline in email. And so if you think of that plus voice, you can see on the horizon that a millennial will not use email at all. Yeah. And how does that transform communications and the employee experience?
I think one of the things on communications is it'll come down to choice. I think one of the things I always find doesn't work is when you say, hey, this is the system you're going to use, and everyone's like, well, I don't want to use it. And this is one of the things that is driven by generational choice, that people the fact they can make choice is something that defines that generation. And I remember when we built this big design team, we brought on like 70 or 80 designers, all like man buns, beards, tattoos, all not really from the world of enterprise software that we were from. And I remember sitting with one of them and walking him through the interface, and he said, it's pretty complex. He said, how do you learn to use it? And I said, well, what normally happens is people roll out enterprise software, and then there's video training, computer-based training, or there's a road show, and everyone goes around the offices showing people how it works. And one of the guys sitting next to him said, so it's okay to write software so bad that you have to be trained how to use it. And that was it. I'm thinking, yeah, this is the way this guy thinks. If he got a piece of software and thought, oh, this is complex, he's just going to throw it away and get another piece that he doesn't think is complex. Right. So I think having that choice is something that will drive how people start to consume things.
And that never existed. You know, I mean, IT organizations have historically been, in fact, most of them still are, very brittle. And whether they throw up the security card or whatever it is, you know, you come in and we use Microsoft Office and Outlook, and, you know, people want to jump out a window. Like, you know, most of them like, who's used that Office? Who uses that anymore? We brought in Google Docs into eBay, which has been a long time Microsoft house, if you will, for, at the time, like, you know, when we were with PayPal, it was 30,000 employees. This was a big cultural change to bring in a document sharing platform that wasn't, you know, these huge bloated pieces of desktop software. But gone were PowerPoints. Gone were 5,000 attachments and 19 revisions of that slide deck that probably, you know, some of these are up here today. Because it's one document, it's shared, and you have 15 people working on it in real time. At the same time, you can see people correcting my spelling as I'm typing. And it, you know, you create these presentations, which everybody hates creating presentations, but if you have to do it, you do it in, you know, 1/100th of the time and effort, and there's no what we call digital space junk. There's not 10,000 attachments sitting in your inbox, your sent box, your outbox. Like, it's crazy. But it was hard to actually get generations of people that were just so used to doing it a certain way to embrace this level of efficiency. But we have to, and it starts, I think, with giving some choices, right, because they unlock such incredible productivity.
Right.
So I've been sitting here listening to the three of us talk and kind of buffering in the background. It leaves me with one takeaway, which is, to start, we live in an amazing time. We live in an incredible time. When I was born in rural China, in a 500-person village, my mom didn't know my gender. Not because of the stuff today where you're like, I want to be surprised. You were getting surprised. She didn't know my due date. And so I arrived, and around that same time, my dad was asked to test the first computer in China. It was the size of a room, and when he went to test it, he had to take his shoes off to go into the room because dust would mess up the calculations. And then we left China. We didn't see a photo of a family member for a decade. And now, my mom is on WeChat, video chatting with my cousin who works at a drone factory. It's an incredible time. There's a lot happening, and it's all very important. But the takeaway that I keep coming back to is, at the end of the day, human connections are still the ones that matter. It's not going away. That's not changed. The human connection is more important than ever. That's our job, to manage that human connection. It can't be outsourced, like I said before. And the human connection is more precious than ever. So I'm a new mom. And by the way, if somebody knows a magical technology to get a 6-month-old to sleep past 4 a.m., email me today. And I know there's a lot of parents in this room, but here's a story that really resonated with me. MIT, a sociology professor there, did a study about the time that children connect with their parents in a really special way. There's one specific moment where kids and parents connect, and that's when you as a parent are going to pick up your child from school, and you're waiting outside in the car, and there's a flood of kids coming out. Your child is one in that flood of kids. They come out, they look, they scan, they pick you out of the crowd, and then something very special happens in that moment. They make eye contact with you. They found their person. You wave, you smile, they come over, they get into a car. That connection actually has outsized importance for that child's feeling of being connected to their parent. What's happening today is the child finds their parent, and their parent is sitting there doing this, because who's just going to sit there for 20 minutes? So that moment, a lot of times, is lost because the child sees you're doing this. So they approach, and here's what's even worse. This is actually heartbreaking. A lot of times, the child gets into the car and wants to start talking about their day, and the parent gives them the finger. Not that finger. This finger. This finger. And so what can tend to happen is that we get so wrapped up in these new exciting technologies that do have real use cases and that are truly transformative, but don't act as a substitute for real human connection. So when we're thinking about, at the end of the day, connecting with the audiences that matter, keeping and building and safeguarding that sacred trust in the reputations of our companies, use every technology that we can get our hands on that works for us. Use everything. But don't get so caught up in the zeros and the ones that we forget that we're carbon-based human beings and end up giving the audiences that matter the finger.
Great thought to close on. That is what we do, right? Authentic engagement, influence behavior. So thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.